This current body of work explores identity, time and place within a tourist destination, challenging the notion of the tourist gaze. Following on from my previous body of work at the Peto Garden at Iford Manor, Wiltshire, I moved on to another tourist destination, the Lake District in Cumbria. Wasdale Valley is situated on the western side of the lakes in Cumbria. It's a popular tourist destination. The tourist gaze is directed to features of landscape and townscape which separate them off from everyday experiences. When we go on our travels, we want to experience a different way of life than we experience every day. We choose our places to be gazed upon because there is an anticipation, especially through daydreaming and fantasy, of intense pleasures. Such anticipation is constructed and sustained through a variety of non-tourist practices, such as film, TV, literature, magazines, records and videos, which construct and reinforce that gaze. The tourist gaze is constructed through signs, and tourism involves the collection of signs. When tourists see two people kissing in Paris, what they capture in the gaze is timeless romantic Paris. When a small village in England is seen, what they gaze upon is the real oldie England. This is the same for the Lake District. People linger over such a gaze, which is then normally visually objectified or captured through photographs, postcards, films, models and so on. These enable the gaze to be endlessly reproduced and recaptured. UNESCO reinforces this by describing the lakes as such. The English Lake District is a mountainous area whose valleys have been modelled by glaciers in the Ice Age and subsequently shaped by an agro-pastoral land use system characterised by fields enclosed by walls. The combined work of nature and human activity has produced a harmonious landscape in which the mountains are mirrored in the lakes. Grand houses, gardens and parks have been purposely created to enhance the landscape's beauty. This landscape was greatly appreciated from the 18th century onwards by the picturesque and later romantic movements, which celebrated it in paintings, drawings and words. It also inspired an awareness of the importance of beautiful landscapes and triggered an early effort to preserve them. My aim is to capture this unique landscape's identity, challenging the notion of the tourist picture postcard image and how it is represented. As Godwin states, I am very wary of the picture postcard. It gets satiated with looking at postcards in local newsagents and at the picture books that are on sale, many of which don't bear any relation to my own experience of the place. The problem for me about the picturesque pictures, which proliferate all over the place, is that they are very warm, soft warm blankets of sentiment, which covers everybody's idea about the countryside. It idealises the country in a very unreal way. With this picture postcard in mind, I look towards the land to represent its identity, displaying its historic geological formations, man-made paths and farming marks. The fleeting hour of life of those who love the hills is quickly spent, but the hills are eternal. Always there will be the lonely ridge, the dancing beck, the silent forest. Always there will be the exhilaration of the summits. These are for the seeking, and those who seek and find while there is still time will be blessed both in mind and body. The strategy for this body of work changed direction and was born out of necessity to complete this degree. I initially planned to take walks and record what I was drawn to using multi-layered techniques. It soon became apparent within the first couple of weeks here that this wasn't going to happen. Due to the lack of internet access, I had to drive out to the nearest village to get 4G and roam it over to my laptop to complete my coursework. This created a journey from the B&B where I lived and walked to a car park in the nearest village. Much landscape photography inevitably requires travelling to particular locations to make work. Sometimes, however, the journey itself is more important than the destination, and the means of locomotion, walking, driving, taking the train, is as integral to the creative strategy of the project. Long's photography work shows a straight line of trampled grass receding towards tall bushes or trees at the far side what appears to be a field. The work documents an action by Long, the creation of a transient line in nature made by repeatedly walking backwards and forth in a grass field. Similarly, my work has many lines, but the lines have already been made. The road, paths, walls, ridges, scree marks have been created beforehand, and I am following the lines already made. Long commented about his work that nature has always been recorded by artists, from historic cave paintings to 20th century landscape photographers. I wanted to make nature the subject of my work, but in new ways. And I started working outside using natural materials like grass and water, and this evolved into the idea of making a sculpture by walking. My first work made by walking in 1967 was a straight line in a grass field, which was also my own path going nowhere. Similar to Long, I make photographs about nature and a journey I take within the landscape. My journey, unlike Long, goes somewhere due to necessity of needing the internet. Cumbrian photographer Ian Lawson based his work around fell life. His images are very picturesque, aimed at the tourist gaze. One body of his work, The Shepherdess, is photographed in a commercial advertisement style. I don't like this style when trying to depict a way of life. He's made the narrative too glamorised and stylised, replicating a fashion shoot for a magazine. By using this style of imagery, he's idealised her way of life, a made-up visual representation to please the viewer who's wanting the picturesque more than documenting her lifestyle. It has a more commercial value in selling me her lifestyle than showing me. I've been looking into the work of photographers who use multi-layered techniques, double exposure and ICM, intentional camera movement. I'm inspired by Chris Friel. His work is impressionistic and due to having a colour impairment, his images end up with a strange colour palette. Valda Bailey is one of the forefront photographers of the moment using this process. Her work is widely known and admired for her bold and abstract imagery. Doug Chinnery is another well-known multi-image photographer whose work is impressionistic, creating painterly abstract images. I like the look of these as they resemble painting techniques used by the painters masters like Monet. Photographer Caroline Fraser's landscape work is a little more representational than the other impressionistic styles, creating a more emotive sense of the land. The black and white brings a sense of remoteness and isolation in contrast to my bold representations of the landscape. Here you can see the contrast of my images with Caroline's. You can see her images are simpler in design with a slightly impressionistic style as opposed to mine which are more representational. Elements of the environment are still present and recognisable as a landscape, but on closer inspection and exploration the images slowly reveal a different landscape. After seeing their work, I experiment with double exposure and ICM. I like the impressionistic style it produces and its potential creative output. As you can see here, the images are different from the other layered images. The style is completely different, it doesn't work with his current body of work. To begin with, I was shooting with a telephoto lens, enabling me to get into the landscape and extract the details of the land. I changed halfway and put a wide angle lens on and shot wide vistas. As the images are kept on the SD card, I can mix the images from when I arrived and started shooting with images from any part of the journey. My methodologies for this body of work consist of using the in-house multi-layered setting where you take two single images separately, then merge them together in the menu settings. Unlike double exposure made, these images can be created away from location at another time and place. You can see from the single images taken how I've put them together to create the multi-images. The multi-layer process blocks out elements of the image, allowing through or covering up parts of the other image, creating a ghostly or shadow effect. The fell ridge creates a vivid line in the landscape. My images are reminiscent of a landscape we gaze upon, and immediately recognisable, but the narrative is questioned and then slowly answered or slowly lost in the fading layers. I'm manipulating the landscape and cross-pollinating the environment to create my own imaginary landscapes. Keeping the images on the SD card allows me to use images which have been shot over a period of time, a passing of time within the frame. By challenging the notions of the tourist gaze, I'm creating a new landscape by blending two recognisable tourist images together. Similarly, like the last module, these images could be sold as art pieces designed for the tourist who requires an alternative souvenir. Multi-exposure photography is nothing new. Examples can be traced back to the very beginnings of photography, where a light-sensitive material has been exposed twice, overlaying one image on top of another. It seems likely that this ability to create layered exposures was discovered by chance as a result of a mistake, forgetting a slide had already been exposed. During this project, my work has been underpinned by the collaboration with the local people and the farming family with whom I lived. Here are two examples of signs I made from A4 paper, which I put in the bar and created dialogue amongst myself, locals and tourists. In conclusion, I've enjoyed this module and project, a journey I went on and enjoyed for the most part. At times it became very tedious and tiring, and the thought of another drive out to access the internet would sink my shoulders, but the beautiful landscape made it all worthwhile.